Hey everyone, today in class you're going to take a practice assessment, a practice test, before we take a checkup all about decimals next week. But as you're doing it on your own, I'm also going to be guiding you through it through this video. So I'm actually going to work through these problems and answer them, but the video is going to stop and allow you to have some time to actually work and try to solve it. And then when I explain what I did, you can check your work and you can go back and correct anything. Then you get to take this home over the weekend so you can actually look it over and review the questions before next week. And we think this will be a really good way for you to get prepared for the checkup. All right, so number 1 says to decompose each fraction into hundredths using area models. Then write the equivalent number sentence using decimals. Okay, so there's 2 steps there. Step 1, I need to change, decompose, break up each fraction into hundredths using the area models. Then I'm going to, step 2, I'm going to write a number sentence using decimals. I'm going to get a different pencil because this one isn't working very well. Okay, so the first fraction I have here is 9/10. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to shade in 9/10 on my area model. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So I shaded in 9/10. Now step 1 of the directions told me to decompose it into hundredths using an area model. So here I can shade in the exact same amount, but in hundredths instead of tenths. Okay, so I know that if I shade in 10 hundredths, I can shade in 10 at a time, right? And I need to shade in, how many am I going to need to shade in order to have an equivalent amount to 9/10? 9/10 would equal how many hundredths? Well, I know 10 times 10 is 100, 9 times 10 is 90. So I'm going to need to shade in 90 hundredths, but I'm going to count by tens as I do it. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90. So I shaded the exact same amount, but here I have 90 hundredths and here I have 9/10. Now, it also told me to write the equivalent number sentence using decimals. So what I have right here, 9/10 is equal to 90 hundredths. I'm going to write that same thing, I'm just going to write it as a decimal. So I can do that anywhere. Maybe I'll do it over here. So I'll write decimal. So 9/10 in decimal form would look like this. 9/10 is equal to, how would I write 90 hundredths? I'm going to fix this a little bit. How would I write 90 hundredths? 90 hundredths would look like this. 9/10 is equivalent to 90 hundredths. All right, this next one here, I have 19/10. So how many of these tenths am I going to shade in? I'm going to shade in 19 of them. All right, so I know I can do this whole thing would be 10 tenths. So that's 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. All right, so I shaded 19/10. Now I need to think, how many hundredths would that be? Well, again, I'm going to convert my tenths into hundredths by multiplying the numerator and the denominator by 10. Go ahead and do that on your own. What would 19 times 10 be? Well, I know when I multiply by 10, I just add a 0 and I move my digits over, so that would be 190 hundredths. So Now I have to shade in 190 hundredths, and that's a lot to shade in, but I don't need to count every single one. I'm going to count this whole thing as 100 hundredths. That's 100, 110, 120, 130, 140, 150, 160, 170, 180, 190. All right, and my next step is to write this fraction number sentence as a decimal number sentence. So 19 tenths. I know when I think of tenths, I know that tenths come right after the decimal point, but I can't put 19 right here, otherwise that would be 19 hundredths. So I need to remember that my 1 is going to move over to my ones place, and my 9 would be in my tenths place. So 19 tenths looks like this. And you might see that that's the same as 1 whole and 9 tenths. 1 and 9 tenths. All right, so now you're going to write, how would we write 190 hundredths? So just like 19 tenths was 1 whole and 9 tenths, 190 hundredths is again 1 whole and 90 hundredths. So I would write 1 and 90 hundredths. And that's it. A and B are done. All right, moving on to the next problem. It says to decompose each fraction into hundredths. So same thing we did up here, but it doesn't say to make an area model. I could make an area model if that helps me, or I could also think about the other tools that we've used in class. So then it says to write the equivalent number sentence using decimals, okay? So this part, I can kind of just do what I did up here, right? So 3 tenths, how many hundredths would that be? 3 tenths would be 30 hundredths. All right, now it's written in fraction form. I need to now write that in decimal form. All right, so 3 tenths, I would write like this, 3 tenths. How would I write 30 hundredths? Hundredths. Done with C. Moving on to D, 6 tenths. Go ahead and write the hundredths form of 6 tenths. How many hundredths would that be? So I know 6 tenths would be 60 hundredths. All right, now your turn to write it in decimal form on your own this time. So hopefully you wrote 6 tenths is equal to 60 hundredths. Okay, moving on to the next page. All right, so number 2 says several points are plotted on the number lines below. Identify, meaning find, the decimal number associated with each point. Associated with means at each point. So I have a point A and a point B. I notice that this number line starts at 0 and goes to 1 5 tenths. And then it looks like here I have 5 tenths, and here I have 1 whole. So if this is 5 tenths, then I'm guessing each of these marks is a tenth. So if this is 0, I would have 1 tenth, 2 tenths, 3 tenths, 4 tenths, 5 tenths is already there, 6 tenths, 7 tenths, 8 tenths, 9 tenths, 1 whole. What would come next? 1 and 1 tenth, 1 and 2 tenths, 1 and 3/10, 1 and 4/10, 1 and 5/10. Now, you don't have to label every single line. It just helps me to do that because that just helps me make more sense of the problem. So now that I know what all of the lines are, I'm going to look at what is point A and what is point B. So A is right here, and that is 2/10. And it says to write it as a decimal, so I'm not going to worry about making it in fraction. And B is 1 and 3/10. All right. We are going to do the same thing here. So this one you're going to have to do a little bit more independently. So this number line starts at 3 and 65/100ths, and it ends at 3 and 8/10. That's kind of weird that we have hundredths here but tenths here. What could I change this to if I wanted it to be in hundredths? What is 3 and 8/10 the same as? 3 and 8/10 is the same thing as saying 3 and 80/100ths. I can do the same thing here. 3 and 7/10 is like 3 and 70/100ths. So now I can see my decimal is going from 65/100ths to 70/100ths. So each one of these must be going up by 1/100th. So if this is 3 and 65/100ths, this would be 3 and 64/100ths. This would be 3. Oh, my gosh, I totally messed up, you guys. 3 and 64/100ths does not come after 3 and 65/100ths. I hope you caught that mistake. That was totally on purpose. So 3 and 65/100ths, what is 1 more hundredth? 3 and 66/100ths. 3 and 67/100ths. What would come next? 3 and 68/100ths. 3 and 69/100ths. And I'm going to let you label the rest on your own. All right, so now that you have labeled it, and if you haven't labeled it, just pause the video and then play the video again once you've labeled it. So now I need to identify what number is at point D, what number is at point E. Well, D is right here. What decimal is at point D? 3 and 66/100ths. I'm going to circle that just because there's a lot of stuff written here. And point E, what decimal would be at point E? If this is 3 and 75/100ths, this would be 3 and 76/100ths, 3 and 77/100ths. Done. All right, moving on. Number 3 says use the symbols greater than, equal to, or less than to compare the following. Justify, prove your conclusions, your answers, prove your answer using pictures, numbers, or words. All right? So, I really like using the place value chart. That's my favorite tool. So that's what I'm going to choose to use. But you do not have to use that. You could explain your answer using words. You could draw an area model. You could explain it using numbers, whatever you like best, but you need to somehow prove your answer. You can't just put a symbol in here. All right, so the first one says 2/100ths versus 24/100ths. Okay, so if I draw a place value chart, I'm going to have my ones, tenths, hundredths. Okay, so 2/100ths would be 0/10, 2/100ths, and 24/100ths would be 0/10. Oh, nope, there's my decimal. So right after the decimal is 2 tenths, and 4 hundredths. All right, so use the place value chart now to compare which one is greater. So hopefully you can see that if we're comparing, we have no ones in either one. Then tenths, oh, here we have 2 tenths, here we have 0 tenths. This one must be bigger. So 24 hundredths is greater. Next one, 13 tenths versus 1 3 tenths. So again, I'm gonna make my place value chart. Ones, tenths, hundredths. Here's my decimal. 13 tenths. So if I write 13 in my tenths place, I know that that can't work. I can't have 2 digits in one place. So I know my 1 is going to move over to my ones place. Okay? And then here I have 1 3 tenths. What do you notice about these? Hopefully you can tell that these are equal. 13 tenths is the same thing as 1 3 tenths. All right, next one, 47 hundredths versus 47 tenths. Try this one on your own. All right, so again, I'm going to use my place value chart. .47 hundredths would look like this. 47 tenths. Oh, can't do that, so that's what 47 tenths would be. So, how would you solve this? Which one is greater? All right, so if we started our ones, oh my gosh, right away, I can see one of them has 0, one of them has 4. It doesn't even matter what is underneath my hand, this one must be bigger. So 4 7 tenths, that was this one right here, 47 tenths. That one is greater. All right, now G, I have addition problems and then I need to compare them. So here we have 4 tenths and 2 hundredths versus 3 tenths and 13 hundredths. Go ahead and add 4 tenths and 2 hundredths on your own. All right, so if I wanted to stack them on top of each other, I could do that, the standard algorithm. 4 tenths plus 2 hundredths. I need to remember, line up my decimals. And if I add, I would get 42 hundredths. Same thing over here. Go ahead and add 3 tenths plus 13 hundredths. All right, so 3 tenths plus 13 hundredths. Add those up. So they're almost the same, but not quite. Which one is greater, 42 hundredths or 43 hundredths? 43 hundredths is definitely greater. All right, now H, I want you to do completely on your own and then check back for the answer. All right, so if you got that one right, excellent. If not, here's my explanation. So 7 hundredths, I would write like this, with a 7 in my hundredths place, plus 7 tenths. Add those up. I get 77 hundredths. Same thing over here, 5 tenths plus 17 hundredths. Notice that my decimals are always right on top of each other. that would be 67 hundredths. So hopefully you can tell right away 77 hundredths is greater than 67 hundredths. All right, guys, that is it for part 1 of the practice test.